I remember we had that discussion about the different stages of infinite banking, at least the way they kind of, the way I saw them. And yeah, and I feel like this, like the Smith maneuver in conjunction with IBC, it's another tool. It aligns with those stages as well. And seeing how they, like what happens with, like during the capitalization phase or capitalization stage and so forth, and what it looks like in retirement and what it looks like. I don't like to say the word retirement because I don't like that word, but yeah, what does it look like in, like in the drawing money out of, whether it's a policy down the road or, taking dividend payments and using that to consume possibly, I don't know, but it's knowing that you have these different approaches.
What is the Smith maneuver and how does it relate to the infinite banking concept? It's the Smith maneuver. So it's not a person maneuvering. It's an actual process. And we are just honored to be here today with a client of mine, Monty Bhatia, who since inception, when he first connected and had so many great questions about the infinite banking concept and the process, how it could be an advantage for him and for his family. And fast forward to today, he's Smith Manoeuvre Certified, which he's going to lead us through a great conversation as to what exactly that process is and the advantage that it represents to the right fit client. He graduated from the University of Toronto as a software engineer and has been working in the technology space for just about the past 20 years now. And he's also a real estate salesperson, real estate investor, and as I mentioned, a Smith Manoeuvre Certified Ambassador. He practices the infinite banking concept in his life. Monty, it is super awesome to have you here on the Wealth Without Bay Street podcast. And we're going to get into the Smith maneuver. So let's do that. How you doing, Monty?
Fantastic. Thank you, Jayson and Richard for that intro. And thank you again for having me on the show. As Jayson was saying, I've been working with Jayson for a while, been listening to your show for a couple of years now. I appreciate, so you guys always talk about, hey, who's the hero? Like, who do you want to be a hero to? And I feel like both of you are heroes to all the people who listen to you. And you being people who are spreading the word about IBC, it's helped me throughout my journey with regards to IBC and the process itself. And I'm here to at least attempt to follow in your footsteps and try to share knowledge about another financial tool called the Smith maneuver and how I've implemented it in my life. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
Thanks
for being with us.
Thank you, and we appreciate that. And it's very nice to hear that people are listening to the show, firstly, and that they're getting the kind of value that you say there. So thank you for that. And you're going to add a ton of value today. Now, Jayson had indicated that the Smith maneuver is not something that you're going to see in the UFC ring. It's not
or in an NFL football game where it's like he just executed the Smith maneuver perfectly.
That's right.
And yeah, so
John Madden isn't going to make a bunch of noises when somebody gets crushed or whatever on a major play. So walk us through a little bit of that. And I think what's going to be really interesting is you kind of give a bit of an overview, is then we can kind of dig into because if my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, really the Smith maneuver entered your life prior to IBC. And then you had this existing knowledge, this understanding, something you were working with in your life, and then the addition of IBC into that is really kind of made for a really positive marriage. So I'm excited to hear about that as we delve deeper.
Great, thank you for that. And you're right; it's not a wrestling move or anything like that. But yeah, I'll definitely share my experience with it, and maybe I'll take a step back and talk about how this all started. So during the pandemic, I guess at the start of the pandemic, we had our second born child, and I was, at the start of the pandemic, we had a child, and that child is, it's a pandemic baby. But we were at a point where, I had to ask questions to myself of like, how do I become more financially literate? Like, how do I learn more and like create a legacy for my kids and for my family and make sure everyone's quote unquote taken care of to a certain extent. So that was one of my questions and one of the goals I had. And I had been learning about the Smith maneuver. You're correct. Just a little bit before I learned about the IBC process. And it came to a point where, I was having a bunch of sessions with Jayson, and Jayson was teaching me, and sort of mentoring me with regards to the IBC process. And then I learned about the Smith maneuver piece, I guess like maybe like half a year before. I actually heard about it probably 10 years ago. And I just thought, okay, well, this is way too complex for me. I don't know how this works. it seems risky or whatever the case. And I just kind of left it at that. And fast forward 10 years, I heard a podcast with Rob Smith, and his father, Fraser Smith, was the, I guess, original creator of the Smith Maneuver. And, he had a book that you could purchase, and I purchased the book, similar to Becoming Your Own Banker. I read the book, and it actually was very easy to read, very similar to Becoming Your Own Banker. Like, there's some similarities between both. Both are processes using products that, anyone can possibly attain in multiple ways. And so there were some similarities I saw between the two in terms of the approach. Obviously, they're completely different financial tools. But yeah, so I learned about it. I reached out to the Smith, like, I guess, Rob Smith and so forth. And I asked, hey, how do I learn more about this? How do I get more involved? And how do I become someone who actually understands this rather than just, hey, this is an idea, like, just a big cloud in the sky. So yeah, so he did talk about, hey, there's a course that you can take being a real estate agent. I took the course, and I read the book first, I took the course, and I became certified. And then the next step I did was I started to implement it in my own life. And I felt like, okay, well, yeah, at least for me, in my experience, coming from a technology background, you can learn as much as you can from a theory standpoint, but until you actually do it, it's like, you don't find those little pitfalls or those little scenarios where you're just like, oh, well, this is how it actually functions when I actually am implementing in my own life. So I implemented, and then, and I'll get to some of the details on that. But just not too long after that, I was listening to a podcast from Mary Jo Ehrman, Farming Without the Bank. And I told Jayson about this.
Shout out to Mary Jo. It is absolutely awesome. If you're tuning in, you're amazing.
Absolutely. And so I was listening to that, riding a bike, and I was hit by a car. And yeah, so that was my moment. Like, it took me about a year of, I'm sure Jayson was very patient. So thank you for being patient with me. But it took me quite a bit of time for me to actually implement IBC as well as a Smith Maneuver in my life. I had to really understand it. Being a software developer or software engineer by trade, I like to pick at things and understand it before I actually move to the next step. So
Really?
yeah,
You don't say. Every other engineer listening to this is like, he's talking to me. He's talking to me.
exactly. Yeah. So so fast forward, riding a bike, listening to a podcast, hit by a car, had a moment where I said, okay, I need to actually wake up and do this, start with this IBC process. And that's when I said to Jayson, look, it's time, right? I'm ready to go. I've done as much on the fence type of balancing as I could. It was time to actually execute. So now I'm implementing both. And then I started to see where I could take advantage of the benefits of IBC as well as the Smith Maneuver together. And they're completely separate financial tools, of course, but there are ways where you could, at least I found the way I'm using it, I could take advantage of some of the benefits of one versus the other and kind of have them work together. So that's kind of my story with regards to these processes. And what I'll do is I'll kind of give some details on some of the things that, as a Smith Manoeuvre Certified Ambassador, some of the things that we see and we talk about in any of our sessions. And one of the big things is the challenges that Canadians face. And, and we all know this, high taxes. And I don't think taxes are going to go any lower. I'm sure you guys can, if you were betting men, you would probably bet that they are going to go higher.
No, would you believe, Monty? Nobody has ever reached out to us or said to us, I wonder if you have a solution in place that can help me with the fact that I feel like I'm not taxed enough. Is that something you might be able to, do you have a solution for that somewhere? Yeah, it's called a psychiatric evaluation. But yeah, if you could describe the essence of the Smith Maneuver, what would that be?
Sure. Okay. So think of it from the point of view of, the whole purpose behind a Smith Maneuver is to convert your non-deductible debt. So non-deductible meaning you can't use it as a tax deduction when you go to do your taxes at the end of the year, and converting that non-deductible debt to tax deductible debt. And that's the whole, I guess that's the whole basis behind it. That's the whole goal.
Okay.
one of the biggest things you have from a non-deductible standpoint is the mortgage on your primary residence.
Mm.
It's, like we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in today's world, with the markets that they are, especially like what I see in GTA and so forth, it's more than just a couple of $100,000s, right? It can get very significant.
Yeah.
And so the whole basis behind it is to convert that non-deductible debt, which is your mortgage, into something that every year you get tax deductions. All the interest on that loan that you have will become a fully 100% deductible loan that you can send to the CRA and say, hey, give me my tax return. And so that's the like, I guess the ultimate goal, the end goal behind it. And then the idea, like the actual process is, and I won't get into like too much of the details, but I'll explain like at a high level the way it works is, and maybe I'll do it with an example is, so what you would do is you would get a readvanceable mortgage on your primary residence. Readvanceable meaning you have your traditional mortgage, which is you have an amortization period and so forth. You have monthly payments, whether it's fixed or variable, you have that mortgage. And then what you can do is, assuming you have 20% equity in your home, you can get attached to that mortgage, you can get a line of credit tied to it. So, think of something like a HELOC but the idea is it's very specific, meaning like the most efficient way to do it is it should be readvancing right away. So what I mean is, let's say you pay down $1,000 on your mortgage, right? On regular payments every month. On a traditional mortgage, you pay it down, your mortgage is going down, fantastic. With the readvanceable portion, what happens is you pay that $1,000 down. Let's say, 600 goes to interest, maybe at the start, and 400 goes towards principal. So what happens with the readvanceable mortgage is now that $400 is available on your readvanceable line of credit to be able to do whatever you want with. A lot of people, what they may do is say, oh my gosh, I have, like over time, that might be thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. And they might say, okay, this is fantastic. Let's go buy a car, or let's go on vacation. And I guess that meant like that, the issue with that is, anything that you're buying, which has the expectation which you're going to be using to consume. So let's say you're going to be going on vacations, buying gas, groceries, clothes, whatever the case, fancy dinners, vacations. This is all non-deductible. So it's all things that, that do not have the reasonable expectation of generating income. So it is a mental shift where you say, okay, well, if you're practicing the Smith maneuver, that line of credit, I'm only going to be using for things that have the reasonable expectation of generating income. So things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, your own business, real estate. If you're using that loan for that purpose, all the interest on that loan now becomes a tax deduction.
Mm.
Yeah. And so the idea is to, over time, to continue to pay down your non-deductible debt. And so like, think of two bars, right? One bar at the start, your non-deductible, which is your mortgage, is high. The bar for your line of credit is very low, meaning you don't have access to it. You haven't used it for anything or whatever the case, or you have a low amount available. But as you pay down that mortgage, the availability of capital you have on the loan side, that starts to go up.
Okay.
And once you start using that, and you're only using it, like that's the key. You're only using it for things that are growing your wealth, right? That's the key. And they're going to provide you income and so forth. All that interest now is going to be a tax deduction. So now fast forward, let's say, 10, 15 years down the road, the idea is your mortgage is down to zero on the left-hand side, but on the right-hand side, your line of credit is high. So it is a bit of a, the idea of always being in debt, that is still there. Like you have to get past that. But the whole idea is now you've replaced that bad debt, which destroys your wealth, with good debt, which creates wealth.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Coincidentally with that, I mean, because you're taking these readvanceable portions and you're entering them into some market activity, and hopefully what's going to go work out well, and we're going to generate a profit. We're leading towards that. You've built up an account value that is equal to or greater than the amount of the loan. So you have now still the equity in the house. you've replaced mortgage debt with this new, more advantageous tax deductible line of credit debt over a period of time. It's kind of like, you're transforming from mortgage debt into this line of credit debt. And now you have on the side somewhere else an account or multiple accounts or property, let's say, that has asset value or equivalency greater than the debt. And then hopefully, ideally, some cash flow as well. And then that cash flow can help support paying the line of credit payments also.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Richard. And so you have it right on the nose. So one example that I've implemented in my own life. So the Smith Maneuver has what they call quote unquote accelerators. So different ways you can implement this process. One of them is, let's say, so we have a real and one of our investment properties. And traditionally what we were doing is we get money coming in. So rent is coming in into that property and we're using that rent to pay the expenses. Pretty standard. Most people are using that approach. And now you have income and expenses at the end of the year, you have a certain amount, which is, which you can write off and so forth, which is great. With this, there's a shift. And the shift is, let's say you get $2,000 in rent, right? Let's say you have, let's just keep it balanced. Let's say you have $2,000 in expenses, and those expenses are mortgage interest, property taxes, heat, hydro, all that stuff, right? What you do is with this process is you bring the Smith Maneuver, and the way you do that is that $2,000, you prepay your mortgage now. So you prepay your mortgage on your primary residence, not on the investment property first. So you prepay your primary residence. So that $2,000 now goes directly to principal, meaning now you have $2,000 available on the line of credit side right away. Mm-hmm. And so now what you do is, okay, I have these expenses that are going to cost me $2,000. You take that amount that's available on the line of credit side, and there's a process where you have to set up accounts and you have to structure in a way where, from an accounting standpoint, it's relatively clean. But at a high level, what happens is that line of credit now, that $2,000 is gone to service those expenses. And now what you've done is, think of what you've done. You've reduced your non-deductible debt by $2,000 for the month. You've used this line of credit, you've converted it to deductible debt by using that line of credit to pay for those expenses. And you'll get a tax deduction for the interest on that $2,000 at the end of the year. And so we did this with one of our properties, and the impact was quite drastic when I look at it from a 25-year standpoint. The Smith Maneuver, online, and we'll have links to this that we can share with the audience. But there is an online calculator that you can take advantage of, and it was quite eye opening for me when I tried it on my own situation. And over the span of 20, 25 years, it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not a small amount. And so, because if you think about it, $2,000 over a year, that's $24K. You're paying down your mortgage by $24K in addition to what you're doing already. And you're not adding in any additional money, right? I would have been paying that money to that property anyways.
And so if you think of kind of walking this down the aisle now with IBC and the process of becoming your own banker. So where do you see that marriage happening in these two processes?
Okay. So that's a great question, Jayson. So I remember the first podcast I heard you on, and that podcast was on, I think it was breakthrough real estate investing. That was the first time I'd heard about this IBC program. Or this
shout out to Rob and Sandy at Breakthrough Real Estate. If you guys are listening to this too, you guys are awesome as well.
Yeah. And coincidentally, Rob Smith was also on that podcast at some point as well. And so when I heard you speak about how you were able to take advantage of, policy loans to pay down a property that you had purchased.
That's right.
And so I started to think about that, and I started to think about, okay, this this cycle of money that's going around in the Smith Maneuver, the way I see these policies being sort of integrated into this process is, and I'm like I said, software engineer. I think in terms of systems. I think of these as two different systems.
Yeah.
I drew a fancy picture at one point. I showed it to Jayson, and it was just literally like chicken scratch. But I drew that picture, and the way I kind of incorporate into this whole process is, I see the ability to use the policy loan as capital to fund the pay down of my primary residence.
Mhm.
And so what happens is I'm paying it down. Let's say I take a $5,000, policy loan from one of my policies. I take that, I put it into my primary residence first. And my purpose behind that 5K is to invest it. So take it, put it towards my primary residence. Now my primary residence mortgage has gone down by 5K, and I have access to 5K on the readvanceable side. And I will then invest that in whether it's stocks, bonds, or real estate, or whatever the case. And I guess in my situation, what I did was I invested in dividend paying stocks, simple standard ones, like nothing too sexy, right? Like just things that give you a good dividend at the end of the day. And so then what I do is I take that dividend, the dividend, the cash dividend that comes out of that investment, and I pay back my policy loan. And so I'm cycling that money through this system. And what I'm doing is I'm taking a policy loan against a financial tool that I co-own. I'm then prepaying my mortgage. So I'm reducing my mortgage by 5K for, which, for many people, that's quite difficult. Like just,
Oh yeah.
especially with inflation the way it is these days.
Yeah. You're paying that for a batch of bananas right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, well, the price has gone up just a tad.
That's right. Yeah. So, okay. So I've taken a policy loan and, practicing IBC. I'm taking advantage of, a tool that I co-own. I'm putting that towards this bad debt, quote unquote bad debt, which we want to get rid of because there's no tax advantages of having this bad debt. I'm converting it to good debt by investing it into anything that has a reasonable expectation of generating income. And then the income from that, I have a choice. I can pay back my policy because the policy can be paid back on my own terms. Or I can then follow the traditional Smith Manoeuvre approach of just paying it back into the mortgage. So I have options, and that's the key behind this. Like I have control, and for me that's worth more than like many things I can think of. Like actual control of my financial situation, and so yeah.
How does it feel?
It feels really good. Like I have to be honest, like I'd say pre-pandemic Monty is a lot different than pandemic Monty, and kind of post-pandemic Monty. I guess we're kind of in that position. We're almost, I don't know. Hopefully one day we'll be out of this whole pandemic world. But yeah, I feel like it's really liberating because now I have, a tool with IBC where I can create generational wealth. And I have a way to expedite my bad debt and getting all those, those crazy dragons. Is that what Sarble calls us, the dragons?
Well, Nelson refers as snakes and dragons. And the other thing too, Monty, God forbid, the unthinkable happened to you. And, you already had a life scare, being struck by a vehicle that can quickly end someone's life. And so you've already experienced that scare. And God forbid, if the unthinkable happened to you, you're not leaving behind any indebtedness to your family. They still control the assets that you purchased and that you're, accumulating. And that windfall of money that shows up, that windfall is also income tax free. And so you're doing a lot of great for your family and for yourself while you're alive, but you'll be a hero too, God forbid, if something happened to you. And gosh, we just don't know, right? There isn't anybody listening or watching that can pull out a calendar and say, this is the right time for me to go, and this is the calendar date that it's going to happen. Like it just doesn't work that way. And so what you're describing in this, this Smith Manoeuvre, I think would be appealing to someone who wants to grow their wealth. They want to participate in opportunities, whether it's dividend paying stocks or maybe just other investment caliber opportunities that track them down, and to be able to create, resubordinate the debt, so to speak, so that you now trigger an event that's where the interest portion is tax deductible. And full disclosure too. I mean, Monty goes on saying, I mean, none of us here on the show today are chartered accountants, or,
Of course.
you know, we're not providing any tax advice or any, you know, advice related to CRA's interpretation of the process or anything like that. It's just something interesting to investigate to see if it could make sense, you know, for your individual circumstance.
Well, on that note, I think, you know, one of the things I heard you say as you were talking about certain examples, in your example, you're talking about dividend paying stocks. You also mentioned, of course, you have rental property. So those are two areas where, you know, parking the Smith maneuver on the side for a moment, and we just look at the rental property. Well, that rental property has a mortgage on it as well. And that mortgage is, because it's already there, it was created for the purpose of generating an income. You've got rent coming in. I mean, that mortgage interest is already tax deductible, at least as a rental property owner. That's what I do, and that's what everyone else I know does. So, you know, now if you think, there was another thing you kind of mentioned as an option that you've seen, or maybe it's, you know, others who have done this. There's the, you know, might be applicable for them to even take that capital on the readvanceable side of the line of credit and plug it into, say, their corporation or their business, because they have an expectation of earning a profit there. Now, again, not providing tax advice, but I'm sure you've seen examples of that as well now that you're in this certified ambassador position.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and there's many ways to take advantage of this tool. And that's where the book goes into details of, like, okay, they call them, quote unquote, as I was saying earlier, accelerators. And it's very eye-opening, at least it was for me, to see, oh, well, if I just did this small shift in my life, what is it like? The impacts, the long-term impacts are astronomical. And that's similar to what I felt with IBC. And that's how I see that, like, there's similarities in terms of the approach and like the ideology and like the Uber goals, but they're very different tools. Like, if you think about them, right? But I, like, this is how I see them kind of working hand in hand. And yeah, and then, you know, there's other things that, you know, thinking about how they can relate to each other down the road. So let's say, you know, at a certain point, 10, 20 years from now, you have completely converted your non-deductible debt. Like, your primary mortgage is, you know, it gets paid down in record time. And it might even be like 5 to 10 years. And you're at a point now, you have this, you know, this fully deductible loan on your mortgage. And, you know, you have options. You can say, okay, well, I'm okay with continuing to be in debt on this loan because I know I'm getting tax deductions every year. And I will use those tax deductions to, you know, maybe pay back my policy or something else, right? Like, you have options, or, and I'll just pay the minimum interest payments because I'm okay with keeping that debt. Other options are, some might say, well, no, I don't want this debt anymore. And you might say, okay, well, I'm going to, you know, fast forward 10, 15 years from now, maybe there's a plan where you leverage your insurance policies to pay down that debt. And so there are options, right? Like, there's so many ways to take advantage of it. And of course, you can always sell one of your assets and like that you've utilized out of this process and, you know, pay back that loan. So there are ways to adjust it. It's just knowing that you have those options. And I think that's, from my experience talking to others, I found like that sort of opened up their eyes in terms of, hey, it's not necessary for everyone, but at least now I know that this tool works and it exists. And, you know, everyone's different. Everyone's risk tolerance is different, but just knowing that there are ways to like fully reverse this as well, I think that's important to know.
That's awesome. And we're going to include in the show notes, we're going to include some links that you were kind enough to provide to us, Monty, and that will give folks not only your contact information, how they can connect with you, but also the calculator that you mentioned earlier in the show, how to purchase the Smith Manoeuvre book and the Smith Manoeuvre homeowners course. And so there's some really good links there that we'll be sure to include in the show notes. And I think what I really recall too about your journey is when you defined, because you as an engineer, you can define things in stages. And that's how you had come up with, you know, those stages of IBC.
Right.
And it was just such a brilliant, you know, we've recorded some content around that and given you full credit for it, because your imagination got to work on, okay, how do I think about this as different life stages? And the Smith maneuver is just part of those life stages for you. And so it's really interesting how you've rethinked your thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And yeah, I remember we had that discussion about the different stages of infinite banking, at least the way they kind of, the way I saw them. And yeah, and I feel like this, like the Smith maneuver in conjunction with IBC, it's another tool. It aligns with those stages as well. And, seeing how they, like, what happens with, like, during the capitalization phase or capitalization stage and so forth, and what it looks like in retirement and what it looks like. I don't like to say the word retirement because I don't like that word, but yeah, what does it look like in the drawing money out of, whether it's a policy down the road or, taking dividend payments and using that to consume possibly, I don't know, but it's knowing that you have these different approaches and knowing that, taxes, I like, in my opinion, I feel like they are relatively high. I'm sure there's a few on this call, like, who are listening who probably feel similar, and, finding ways to take advantage of, what is available from the CRA standpoint. And I agree, as you said earlier, it's, always like working with an accountant, working with those who actually understand this process. And yeah, I have, like, from my side, I also have a network of brokers and so forth that who practice this Smith maneuver approach as well. And I can help at least provide my thoughts on, if I ever spoke with anyone on, okay, maybe this is a way where you could take advantage of this tool and how it kind of works together with IBC. So yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And thinking from a stages point of view, that's, yeah, it helps me picture it down the road. And what does it look like? Because otherwise it's just someone can explain something to me. And if that's how I sort of consume knowledge and consume information and make sense of it, because there's a lot of information out there, right?
There sure is. Rich,
Well,
anything to add?
Yeah, I'm curious that, being that, you're a real estate investor and, going on this journey of learning and discovery for yourself. One thing that I pick up on, Monty, is that you also have a desire to share that knowledge and to express to other people. And so now that you've been integrated with this and you're talking to people are coming into your network, your sphere. And I'd imagine that you get pretty excitable about trying to share this information to them. How do you find it when you're speaking to people? Is there a lot of people who are familiar or they've heard of the Smith maneuver before, or is this a brand new experience to them that you kind of have to, start from the beginning and build up? I'm curious in your interactions with people, what you're finding, and then kind of piggyback on that. I would imagine the Smith maneuver doesn't come up without mentioning IBC somehow within the following two sentences. So what do you find the reception is from people when you have these kind of conversations and it's fairly new to them?
That's a great question, Richard. So I find it's varied. There's like different groups I've noticed where some are they're oh yeah, I've heard of it before. And someone has said to me they're aware of the whole Smith maneuver process, and similar to IBC, I've heard a few that have said, "Hey, oh yeah, I've heard of that." And then there's some who are like blank canvas, who know nothing about either approach. And I find with those who are, when I'm speaking to them about the Smith maneuver process, at first there's a reluctance to talk about it because there's a worry about, okay, this is going to cost me a lot, or my cash flow is hit. And the idea behind this is, the interest that you pay on that readvanceable portion, let's say it's, interest has gone up in the last, last 6 months or so, or even longer. But the idea is to service that debt with that readvanceable portion as well. So yeah, let's say it's $300. You take $300 from that readvanceable and you pay it back, and that services that debt. And it's still, you're still getting those tax deductions and so forth. So it's just providing knowledge and providing, like, all in those scenarios where I suspect there's going to be a question, or, okay, this doesn't make sense because of XYZ. I can answer those because I've gone through myself, and I'm living this process right now, and I'm living both processes. And it's similar with IBC. I find there's groups who are very like they don't have any idea what it is, right? They're just like, okay, I didn't even know you could do this. I didn't even know this was a process. And I totally get excited about sharing the knowledge with them because I'm seeing the benefits in my own personal life, and being able to show them like specific use cases of, oh yeah, we wanted to do a reno on, in the background, you can't see it, but there's a ton of stuff going on, but we wanted to do a reno, and okay, well, we can take advantage of a policy loan to do that reno. Or we can use that policy loan to service debt, or we can use it to prepay our mortgage. And like, there's so many options, but yeah, you're right. Like I find it's very varied, and different groups have different sets of experience with it. And yeah, and I find you'll see it in their eyes sometimes, that just when they have that moment of, okay, this actually makes sense. And I know I have that every day. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, Jayson, I'm sure he saw that in my eyes probably 30 times, because there are 30 situations where I was just like, yeah, I need to go back and say, and read this chapter. And when I come back, it's like, okay, yeah, I get it now. And so, yeah, it takes time. Well, it took time for me, but once I got it, and I'm very excited about learning about it. And thank you for that. And I'm excited that I was able to learn about the Smith maneuver in more detail than what I knew 10 years, because 10 years ago, I was that person. I was okay, this is too complex. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's actually a pretty simple process when you're actually implementing it.
One of the really key things I heard you say in there, and I think, my understanding of the Smith maneuver, maybe not to the advanced level of yours, but, there is a really importance, and I think you identified it here, of making sure that you're not commingling funds. So when you're using that readvanceable line of credit, in order to kind of simplify your tax team, you can't all of a sudden, you're doing this and doing this and doing this, and then, oh, boom, we're going to go now do renovations on our house, which is not a profit generating center, or we're going to go on that family vacation. As soon as you start to interfere now with the purpose of that credit line, you could be getting yourself into potentially some hot water. So one of the advantages that I'm picking up on that you stated is, because you're also doing IBC at the same time, and you're building up a capital reservoir, you're creating equity in another location. Now, when you want to go do something, you can implement that in your life for, let's say, the family vacation or renovations, as you identified on your primary residence. And you're not now commingling that circumstance in with the other Smith maneuver activity. So really what I hear you saying, Monty, is that you have a lot more options available, because you're walking both paths in your life, and you get to determine how you decide on which path is interacting with your financial life at any given moment in time. Am I capturing that right?
Richard, you're absolutely right. That was one of the first things when I started to execute these processes in my life. At first, I was, okay, I don't like, it was great to me in terms of, okay, well, they both have these benefits, and how do I take advantage of one versus the other? And when do I use one? And that's, so, non-deductible. Hey, I'm going on vacation and I want to take advantage of, a policy. I would go down that path rather than, okay, my line of credit, I don't want to touch that for anything that's not, revenue generating or income generating. And you're absolutely right. Like, if you start to commingle them, it's going to be a accounting nightmare. And at least that's what I'm told. And I don't want to go down that path. So it does kind of create a line in the sand between the two and say, okay, well, if I want to do X, then I'll use the policies. And otherwise, if I'm using it for investments, let's start with this and let's see if we can accelerate our, the pay down of my mortgage. So you're absolutely right. And that was one of the things that started me down the path of seeing how they kind of work together. And they're two complete systems, but kind of how they coexist in my life. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And it also speaks to the fact that they each require an appropriate mindset. So there's ways that you could be successful with these things, and there's also ways that you can be not successful. And it's our thinking and our mindset that really makes that difference, and our commitment to follow the path. Otherwise you could create potentially some landmines, with this, commingling, what have you. So I really appreciate what you've shared with us today, Monty, because it's been so beneficial for people to understand. I mean, we know many people in the real estate investor community that are already familiar with this, but maybe they don't know exactly how to implement it, or they've been in real estate investment. Now they're discovering IBC. They're trying to mingle those things together in their life. And now they want to know how they add this layer in. So I think you've provided a ton of value there. And, now I understand, based on what you said about, having your incident where you were taken out by a car while you're riding your bike. Now, you may not have thought when you came to and got out of the hospital that you were a superhero, but you're still with us today.
Yes.
And so,
Thank goodness.
You may have some adrenaline superpowers that yet to be discovered. So hopefully no scientists are going to come and, snag you out of your house and drag you away. But I really do appreciate what you've shared, because it's so beneficial for our community to hear this kind of content and understand what are real people doing in their life. People that are investing, they understand things like real estate. They're using dividend stocks. They're practicing new techniques, not really new techniques, but new to maybe our listeners, things like the Smith Maneuver, and they're able to integrate these things together as a cohesive financial vehicle that's working throughout their life. So well done. And I mean, I would just love to hear, again, who do you most want to be a superhero to?
So thank you for that, Richard, and thank you, Jayson, for both of you to have me on this call and on your podcast. So yeah, I had a think about that, and for me, it's so of course my family, and I want a situation where my kids down the road, when they're old enough to, hey, it's time for you to read Becoming Your Own Banker, and it's time for you to read the Smith Maneuver, and you can see how we've implemented it in our world, and for them to be able to see the advantages that we've set up for them from inception, from the time they were born. So being heroes to them and being heroes to, the bloodline, right? Like think of it as a bloodline, like their kids and going forth. And so to my family, to my wife, of course, and, to my immediate family, I preach all this stuff to anyone who wants to listen. So, to my siblings, everyone around me, and people I meet who are in a situation where maybe it's like, hey, I see the pre-pandemic Monty in you, right? Like where you're just at that point where, hey, I want to be in a better situation financially. I want to create this this engine that continues to pay back over time. But I just don't know where to start. So being able to provide this knowledge to groups like that, I think that's who, that group, all of the above there. I know it's a big group, but that's who I'd love to be a hero to.
There you have it. Monty Bhatia, everybody. And check the show notes. We've put some links in there. And for everyone who's watching us on the YouTubes, the playlist just appeared because our editing team is awesome. And that playlist is there for you to continue your journey of learning. And so, Monty, thank you sincerely for being with us. And we will have you back on the show as as time continues to progress, and we see the impact that both of these processes in concert are having a positive impact on your life financially. And we appreciate having you here. So thanks for being with us. And to all our viewers, all our listeners, we sincerely appreciate you and wish you an outstanding rest of your week. Thanks so much, guys. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care.